The boys who found the cellar were not supposed to be there. They were looking for adventure, not evidence. It was late in the summer of 1931, in the small town of Maple Hollow, Pennsylvania, when three local boys, Harold, Tom, and Eddie, wandered toward the old Miller place at the edge of town. The mill had been silent for nearly a decade, its wooden wheel half collapsed into the creek, its windows dark behind curtains of dust and cobwebs. Most locals said the place was haunted, though few could explain why. Children dared each other to peek through the broken windows, but none had gone inside until that day. Inside, the air was still and surprisingly clean. The boys explored quietly, stepping over splintered floorboards and piles of rotting crates. When Harold kicked at one particularly loose board, a hollow sound echoed from beneath the floor. Beneath a stack of crates, they discovered a small wooden trap door, almost invisible to anyone not looking for it. It was locked from the outside, but after a few moments of struggling, they pried it open. The stairs led into darkness. A strange, silent air seemed to rise from the opening, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible scent of old wood and dust that had never been disturbed. At the bottom, the boys found a small, narrow room. It was neat and functional. A bed, folded and apparently unused for years, sat against the wall. A single oil lamp stood on a table. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars of preserved food, some labeled with dates ranging from 1923 to 1927. A small bookshelf held a worn Bible, pages carefully turned and underlined. A pair of men's boots were positioned beside the wall, as though waiting for someone to wear them. Above the bed, a framed photograph of a woman and a young girl hung on the wall. The image of the man in the picture had been torn away, leaving only empty space. The boys ran to the sheriff's office, breathless and wide-eyed. Within hours, Sheriff Harold Denton arrived at the mill. He was a quiet, careful man, patient and methodical, who believed in order even when the world felt chaotic. He moved through the cellar slowly, taking notes and examining everything. Later, in his official report, he wrote, "The room appeared inhabited at some point, but showed no signs of crime. It seemed maintained and organized, though abandoned. There was no evidence of violence or struggle, only a sense that someone had lived below, deliberately and with care." The discovery quickly became the town's primary topic of conversation. Maple Hollow was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business. Suddenly, everyone had a theory. Some suggested it had been a bootlegger's hideout during Prohibition. Others whispered of a secret family tragedy. The older residents, however, remembered the Millers and began recounting details they had long suppressed. Mary Miller had been a quiet, exacting presence in the town. Married to Samuel Miller, the miller who ran the old watermill, she raised their daughter Clara with meticulous care. The household had been considered ordinary, even modest, and Mary had earned a reputation for being polite, organized, and discreet. When Samuel disappeared in 1922, Mary told the town he had gone east to Philadelphia to seek work. It was a believable explanation in those years of economic uncertainty, and most people accepted it. Neighbors remembered Mary's demeanor as calm and collected, even when her husband did not return. She attended church every Sunday, always sitting in the same pew, her daughter at her side, and always managing to avoid gossip. When asked about Samuel, her answer remained the same. He wasn't well. He needed time. Over the years, the town gradually stopped questioning her story, though some remembered faint oddities. Lights flickering beneath the millhouse floor at night, occasional sounds like someone moving or coughing, which Mary always explained away as animals or wind. Sheriff Denton reopened the missing person case, despite the passage of nearly 10 years. He questioned neighbors who had lived nearby at the time of Samuel's disappearance. Some recalled seeing Mary purchasing more food than her household seemed to require. One older woman remembered faint lights in the mill basement and hearing strange, muffled noises late at night. "I told myself it was nothing," she said. "But now, seeing that room, I wonder what it really was." Denton also located Clara, now 19, working in a nearby town. She was polite, careful, and observant. When asked about the cellar, she hesitated. "Mother said it was dangerous," she explained. "The floorboards could give way." When pressed about visiting it, she admitted only once, as a child, hearing a cough below. "Mother said it was a stray cat," she said, her voice measured and steady, betraying nothing more. The room itself offered subtle clues about its occupant. The food jars indicated regular care, the bedding was clean, and the Bible was annotated in a meticulous hand. Whoever had lived there had been looked after, and possibly had chosen to remain in that space. The careful arrangement of objects, the neat folds of sheets, and the labels on jars all suggested deliberate effort rather than neglect. By the time reporters from the county paper arrived, the story had spread beyond Maple Hollow. The front page headline read, "The Cellar Room, a Town's Forgotten Secret." The article avoided conclusions, instead highlighting the mystery and the meticulous condition of the room. Visitors speculated endlessly. A hidden family tragedy, a long-kept illness, even mental instability. Yet Mary's reputation remained, for many, one of kindness and care rather than cruelty. The apothecary clerk remembered her purchasing bandages and ointments regularly, always polite, always precise. Weeks later, Sheriff Denton located Mary in a small rented room above a laundry 20 miles away. She greeted him calmly, neither shocked nor defensive, and admitted she had wondered when someone might find the cellar. She explained that Samuel had indeed returned home in 1922, but he was not the man he had once been. "He was afraid of the world," she said. "He asked to stay below, where it was quiet. I only did what he wanted." When Denton asked why she had never told anyone, she asked in return, "Would you have believed me?" There was no confession, no evidence of a crime, nothing that fit neatly within the law. The case remained unresolved, and Denton noted in his report that her account was consistent but unverifiable. Over the following months, the mill was demolished, the cellar filled in, and the property eventually sold. Yet the story persisted. Whispered in town, remembered as the tale of Mary Miller, the so-called cellar wife. Some claimed she had cared for a man broken by life. Others believed she had trapped him, a victim of her own fears or guilt. A few suggested she had acted out of madness. No one ever saw Samuel Miller again. Clara moved away shortly after, and in later years she described her mother as kind but very quiet. She carried something inside her she never spoke about. The only tangible remnant of the Miller family remained in a photograph stored in the sheriff's evidence box. A woman, a girl, and the empty space where a man's face had once been. That photograph would become, for many in Maple Hollow, the emblem of a story that was both ordinary and inexplicable. A secret carefully kept, slowly uncovered, and ultimately unresolved. The story of Mary Miller and the cellar could not be understood without looking back to the years before the discovery, to the quiet, unnoticed changes that had taken place in Maple Hollow. In 1922, the mill was still running, though barely. Samuel Miller had been the town's watermill operator for nearly 2 decades. His work was reliable but solitary, and Mary had long managed the household with precision. Clara was then just 10 years old, a cheerful child who sang in the church choir and carried herself with a seriousness beyond her age. The town considered the Millers ordinary, unremarkable, perhaps even model citizens in a community that valued predictability over excitement. Yet small signs of strain were evident to those who observed closely. Samuel had begun to spend long hours in the mill, working late into the night, his movements more deliberate, his moods quieter than they had been in earlier years. Mary, attentive and watchful, noticed subtle changes in him, hesitation in speech, frequent moments of distraction, and a quiet withdrawal from the public life they had once shared. Neighbors later recalled that he had become a man of fewer words, often disappearing into the mill's basement, returning only at mealtimes. Some suggested fatigue, others whispered of a deeper unease that no one dared name aloud. Mary, for her part, adapted to the shifting circumstances with careful precision. She assumed the household responsibilities that Samuel had once shared, ensuring that Clara was fed, clothed, and prepared for school each day. She kept the accounts of the mill meticulously, even as profits dwindled and machinery aged. Mary did not complain, did not seek sympathy, and did not confide in the neighbors beyond casual pleasantries. Her manner, calm and consistent, masked both her anxieties and her growing concern for her husband. By the end of 1922, Samuel disappeared. According to Mary's account, he had traveled east to Philadelphia to seek work, as many men did during those hard economic years. Letters were sparse or non-existent, and by late summer, the town had largely accepted that he would not return soon. Mary maintained appearances with care. She attended church without fail, greeted neighbors politely, and ensured that Clara's life remained uninterrupted. Yet behind closed doors, the routines of the household had shifted dramatically. Rooms that once echoed with conversation and laughter now held only measured silence. Over the next several years, Mary's routine became increasingly structured around Clara's presence and well-being. She maintained the household with an almost ritualistic precision. Meals were prepared at set times, chores completed in order, and visits to the apothecary or market carefully planned to avoid arousing suspicion. Clara, for her part, adapted naturally to the rhythms of the home, absorbing her mother's meticulous approach to life. She would later recall the careful way her mother folded clothes, labeled jars, and arranged furniture. The precision of Mary's management suggested both devotion and a need for control over circumstances that could not otherwise be managed. The town, meanwhile, noticed few outward signs of disruption. Those who visited Mary's home saw her polite, composed, and attentive. She gave clear instructions to Clara and maintained cordial relations with neighbors. But she never spoke of Samuel beyond what had already been told. He was gone for work, expected to return eventually. Letters from Philadelphia were never mentioned. Questions, when they arose, were deflected gently or ignored. To the outside observer, nothing appeared amiss. Yet within the walls of the Miller home, Mary's life contained subtleties that would later seem extraordinary. She was, according to later accounts, attentive to provisions and storage, maintaining an inventory that suggested she was feeding someone beyond herself and Clara. She was discreet in her visits to the apothecary, purchasing bandages, ointments, and supplies that neighbors would later describe as curious for a widow with one child. These actions, though ordinary in isolation, suggested the careful management of a life that was partially hidden from the world. Clara's recollections from those years reflect the ambiguity of life within the Miller household. She remembered hearing sounds from the mill's lower rooms, occasional coughing, movement, or the creak of boards, but had been told to ignore them. Mary instructed her daughter that the basement was unsafe, that the floors might give way, and that curiosity could lead to danger. These explanations were accepted by a child whose understanding of adults' actions was still developing. Over time, Clara internalized her mother's warnings, treating the hidden spaces of the home as forbidden, unspoken territories. Neighbors continued to speculate in quiet ways. Some remembered seeing Mary emerge with baskets of food in the early mornings, returning later in the day with empty containers. Others recalled glimpsing a faint light beneath the mill at odd hours, always disappearing before they could approach. Most of the town, however, did not question these signs, content to allow Mary her privacy. Maple Hollow had long been a community where appearances mattered more than inquiry, and Mary's careful behavior ensured that questions seldom arose beyond whispers. Mary's approach to the mill's legacy was similarly methodical. She ensured that machinery was maintained enough to prevent decay, though she did not attempt to operate it commercially. Accounts were balanced, ledgers kept neat, and her management of the property prevented neighbors from suspecting that anything unusual had occurred. To those observing, she appeared to have assumed full responsibility for her family's stability, adapting to Samuel's absence with remarkable composure. Through these years, the question of Samuel's whereabouts lingered quietly. Mary Agnes' story remained consistent. He had traveled for work and had chosen not to return immediately. Yet subtle traces of irregularity persisted. Letters were missing or unaccounted for. The careful management of food and provisions suggested preparation for someone's care. Occasional sounds within the mill hinted at activity that could not be explained by Mary or Clara alone. These inconsistencies, however, were small enough to be dismissed, easily overlooked by neighbors and authorities alike. By 1931, when the boys stumbled upon the cellar, the events of the previous decade were largely forgotten outside of Mary and Clara's experience. The room beneath the mill contained traces of life that had been carefully maintained. Food jars labeled with dates, a folded bed, a Bible with passages marked, and the photograph of Mary and Clara on the wall. For 10 years, someone had lived in that space. The meticulous attention to cleanliness, order, and provision suggested care and intent. Whoever had resided there had been tended to, sustained in secrecy, and shielded from the town's eyes. This period, the vanishing years, remained the most mysterious and psychologically complex aspect of the story. Mary's actions, guided by discretion and an unusual sense of duty, allowed life within the household to continue uninterrupted on the surface while maintaining hidden layers of activity beneath the floorboards. Clara's early awareness of sounds, movement, and restricted spaces would shape her perception of reality for years to come. When the sheriff and later the newspapers reported on the cellar, the town began to reconcile what they had long suspected but never investigated, that Mary E.S. quiet, exacting life had concealed something extraordinary. Observers noted the careful organization of the room, the presence of provisions, and the deliberate absence of violence or disorder. The vanishing years, which had passed quietly, revealed themselves as the foundation of the mystery that would captivate Maple Hollow and define the story of Mary Miller, the woman who maintained control over a life others could only imagine. By 1931, the discovery of the Miller cellar had shifted Maple Hollow from quiet curiosity to tense fascination. The room beneath the mill revealed the presence of a life carefully concealed, organized, and maintained for nearly a decade. Sheriff Harold Denton had observed every detail: the folded bedding, the jars of preserved food labeled with precise dates, the neatly placed boots, and the Bible marked with passages of faith. Yet there was no crime scene, no body, no clear evidence of wrongdoing. Only the quiet suggestion that someone had lived there under conditions both unusual and deliberate. The sheriff's investigation led him first to the neighbors who had remained in town, now recalling the faint lights beneath the mill, the occasional muffled noises, and Mary's unusual diligence in caring for provisions. Some remembered being puzzled at the quantity of food Mary bought or the quiet trips she made to the apothecary, but at the time, no one questioned it. By 1931, however, these small details gained a new significance. Denton cataloged them all, noting patterns of consistency and meticulous attention. To him, it was less a matter of legal concern and more an unusual human story. A woman maintaining control over her household and something or someone hidden from the world. Clara Miller, now 19, was located in a nearby town. She had grown into a poised, careful young woman, shaped in part by the rhythms of her childhood under Mary's guidance. She recounted her experiences with quiet candor, speaking of her mother's exacting management of the house, of the instructions to avoid the mill's basement, and of the faint sounds she had occasionally heard. "Mother said the floor was unsafe," Clara explained. "She told me not to go there. I did as I was told." When asked directly if she had ever seen who lived in the cellar, she hesitated, then said, "Only once, as a child. I thought I heard a voice, but I was told it was nothing. I never questioned it." Mary Miller herself was located in a small rented room above a laundry 20 miles away. She received the sheriff calmly, neither defensive nor surprised, as if the discovery had been inevitable. When asked about the cellar, she admitted that Samuel had indeed returned home after leaving in 1922, but he was not the man he had been. "He was afraid," she said softly. The world outside frightened him. He asked to stay below, where it was quiet. I only did what he wanted. When pressed as to why she had never informed anyone, she asked simply, "Would you have believed me?" No one could offer a definitive answer. There was no confession of wrongdoing, no evidence of violence, and no legal basis for action. Denton's report remained cautious, listing the case as unresolved, with Mary's statements recorded but unverifiable. The newspapers speculated endlessly, printing headlines such as "The Secret Room Beneath the Mill" and "Mary Miller, Caretaker or Captor." Letters to the editors offered theories ranging from mental instability to compassion for a fragile husband, but no one could fully comprehend what had taken place. The town itself became a space of reflection and quiet debate. Some considered Mary's actions an act of devotion, a way of shielding a man broken by life from a world that had grown too harsh. Others suspected fear or shame as a motivating force. A few whispered that Mary's behavior reflected the loneliness and psychological strain of a widow navigating social expectation and personal obligation. Each interpretation carried weight, none could be fully proven, and all remained intertwined in the complex narrative of human morality. The room beneath the mill, once the site of careful provision and secrecy, was eventually destroyed. The mill itself was demolished, the cellar filled, and the land sold. Yet the story persisted in Maple Hollow, repeated in hushed tones, recorded in personal letters, and later recounted in local histories. Mary Miller became known as the Cellar wife, a figure both ordinary and extraordinary, whose quiet determination created a secret that neither time nor distance could erase. Clara moved away shortly after the story came to public attention. In interviews decades later, she described her mother as kind, deliberate, and always quiet. She carried a responsibility no one could see, and she bore it carefully without complaint. Historians and locals alike have debated the implications ever since. Was it devotion, necessity, or compulsion that guided Mary's actions? The answer remains unknown. The photograph found in the sheriff's evidence box remains a lasting emblem of the story. Mary and Clara, smiling, with a man's face torn away, a silent reminder of the life kept beneath the floorboards. The jars of food, the folded sheets, the carefully marked Bible. They testify to a decade of careful living in secrecy. The absence of a body, the lack of legal violation, and the careful order of the room leave only questions about mercy, control, and the choices we make in isolation. Maple Hollow remembers the story less for scandal and more for the quiet enigma it represents. The cellar, destroyed and forgotten, lives on in the town's memory, a symbol of a life hidden in plain sight, a family preserved in secrecy, and a woman whose determination shaped the fate of those she cared for. The truth, measured and subtle, is a story that leaves more questions than answers, a story of human complexity and the silent power of decisions made in solitude. In the end, the Miller household and the hidden cellar serve as a testament to a reality that existed beyond what the world could see. Mary's quiet, deliberate actions preserved a life beneath the town's gaze, and in doing so, created a legacy of mystery that endures to this day. Scholars, journalists, and townspeople continue to revisit the case, not in search of scandal, but for insight into human behavior, the limits of duty, the depths of secrecy, and the often unseen ways people care for one another when no one is watching.